On this prequel episode, we've got our The Neverending Story fan poll follow-up. We're discussing traumatizing kids movies and previewing Neverending Story 2, the next chapter. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It's another prequel episode. April is not joining us for this prequel episode, but she will be back for our main episode this coming Wednesday, Tuesday night for patrons. On this episode, though, we have a lot of stuff to get to, so we're going to jump right into our patron shoutouts. First up, we have two new patrons this week. They are, at the $5 Hugo Award-winning level, Jesse Craig. Thank you, Jesse. And at the $15 Academy Award winner level, we have Jeff Niederhofer. Thank you, Jeff, for jumping on at the $15 Academy Award-winning level. Make sure you send us that patron request of what you want us to talk about. All right, let's get to the rest of our Academy Award-winning patrons as we do every single prequel episode. And they are, again, Jeff Niederhofer joining the ranks, Winchester's Forever, Kelly Napier, Gray Hightower, Eli Young, Scratch, Just Scratch, Selby Says Black Lives and Trans Lives Matter. I listen most weeks for the podcast download numbers and Facebook algorithm discussion. And finally, Alina Doletkalova. So that's the second and last one. There's our $15 patron who changed their name. I'm trying to figure out exactly what that person to.
Actually messaged me to let me know that they were being sincere and not like tongue in cheek, because we talk about like our trouble with the Facebook algorithm. We do discuss that so much,
especially in the prequel episodes. Yeah. So they're saying they listen to the prequels particularly. They said
they find it interesting.
Huh. Well, there you go. Yeah. I don't think we ever give specific download numbers, or are they saying to bump our numbers?
Maybe to bump our numbers.
Okay. Well, we appreciate it nonetheless. Either whether you're listening for us to talk about it or because you want to help us pump those numbers up. We appreciate you. But more so, we appreciate you for being a $15 patron. That's fantastic. All right, let's get into our fan poll follow-up for The Neverending Story, Part 1.
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
All right, so we had a good bit of feedback here. Our feedback was a little bit scattered around on different posts this time around for some reason. I think I got everything.
Hopefully.
If I left yours out, I apologize.
If we left yours out, message us, specifically message us on Facebook or whatever, and we'll try to work it in like we don't get another prequel episode. Or sorry, on the next prequel episode where we do the Part 2 follow-up. If it's we
can do that.
Yeah, if it's something, especially if it's something relevant to the story overall, then message us if we did miss yours.
So on Facebook, we got shafted with the poll once more.
As always.
Well, I tried using Facebook's actual poll feature,
and it still didn't.
Which was impossible to find, might I add.
I think they just don't like polls.
It was like buried in the settings. That's I had to go searching for it. But then we got like even worse. Of feedback that I don't know.
Who knows?
So anyway, we had one vote for the movie and one for the book on Facebook. And we did get a couple comments. Ian said, I've always put off reading the book because of the spider, Mirkwood, Shelob, and the Ungoliant.
I don't know.
Are not fun reads for me, but I will make the attempt after I finish this current read. The movie is a nostalgic fun fest. The idea of interacting with a book is always appealing. The effects still hold up, and even in my 30s, the swamp of sadness and the rock biter's deep existential depression still make my eyes well up. I'm glad they didn't have Artax talk, otherwise it becomes soul-crushing.
I wish they made him talk, but he literally did sound and talk like Mr. Ed. He was like, "No, Atreyu, I don't want to die," or whatever. It's like doing the like Mr. Ed voice. That would be
terrible.
Hilarious. Surely there's a fan edit out there of like the Mr. Ed voice of Atreyu. Or anyways.
And another comment from Luciana, who said, definitely the book. I read it so often as a kid that my copy fell apart. I can't seem to vote in the poll for some reason, though. Or maybe I just can't tech today. I'm in Germany, native Australian, but my German isn't bad, so I can comment a little on the naming and the translation questions that you had. Essentially, yes, they did change the names, but the German versions were as fantasy nonsensical as the English ones. The original name for Falkor, for example, was Fuchur. Fuchur?
Yeah, I don't know.
Fuchur. So put that into a German pronunciation, which is kind of a mashup of the words for fox and for ancient. So that's interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you for that
Yes.
specific feedback we were looking for.
And on the subject of translated names, a German listener did reach out to April, and she messaged me with some screenshots and brought up that change of Falkor's name, as well as that the childlike empress was Rosenkind, Rosenkind, Rosechild.
Yeah.
And also that Mr. Coriander's full name, which is Karl Conrad Coriander, was spelled with all K's in the original, which is very German. But that was changed to all C's in the English language version because in the book, Bastian is like, oh, that's CCC and I'm BBB. When obviously in America, they wouldn't want him to be like, it's KKK.
KKK. You're KKK. Great. Yeah, that seems, it's a smart change.
There's an implication there that maybe you wouldn't have in 1970s Germany.
No.
But
no.
Definitely in America.
Yes.
Over on Twitter, we had 5 votes for the book, 3 for the movie, and 2 listeners who could not decide between the two. Shelby Suderman, at Shelby Suderman, said, I picked the book because I prefer the character depth we get for Bastian and Atreyu. I feel like that setup is going to become more important in the second half.
Okay, so Shelby stopped with you.
I think so, yeah.
It would appear, at least, to watch
Shelby is probably ahead of me now, though, because I have not been motivated to read.
But she stopped for the first movie with you, yeah.
Matt Nelson, large cartoonist at large, at Matt W. Nelson, said, love the movie, but the film can't quite match the book. Do not watch the third movie. It is hot garbage. An early performance by Jack Black may entice you, but stand strong, you will regret it. Unless you do it for good, bad, or bad, bad.
I have seen it, as I mentioned, I think, in the main episode. I have seen the third one, and I remember I remember that I don't remember much about it, other than I did remember Jack Black being in it, as like he plays one of the bullies in the beginning.
Interesting.
There's a similar.
So it's a very early performance by Jack Black.
Yeah, pretty well. That one came out in like the midnight. So yeah, it is still early Jack Black, but
I mean, to play one of the bullies, he would have had to have been a kid, right?
Yeah,
Or a
no. Well,
teenager,
it's
at
like in
least.
high school because he's older still. I think.
Right.
I think this takes place in high school. He plays
so
like
he's a teenager.
he plays like a high schooler.
Playing a teenager.
I'm trying to remember. Let me do some very quick IMDbing here and see how early this was in his career. I mean, it is early for sure. I'm just not sure because like whatchamacallit was pretty early. It may have been so it may have been his first feature film. No, Airborne, which I'm not sure what that is, but he was in the movie called Airborne, which looks like a rollerblading movie from 1993.
Oh.
He was in Demolition Man in 93 as a character called Wasteland Scrap. So he may have been like a nameless.
Yeah.
And then he was in some TV movies and TV shows. And then the Neverending Story, 1994. Neverending Story 3, 1994. He played Slip the Bully.
Did you guys do Demolition Man on Good, Bad, or Bad, Bad? Or am I thinking
We have
of
not,
something
no.
else?
I mean, it is, people have done it on similar shows, but
I guess
what is the movie I'm thinking of that he was in?
I have no idea what you're thinking of. Pretty much the extent of my knowledge of Jack Black's career is School of Rock and The Holiday.
I was thinking of High Fidelity, which wasn't until 2000, and he was in stuff like he was in The Cable Guy in 96, he was in Biodome in 96 as Tenacious D apparently. Anyways, he was in an episode of The X-Files. He was in Waterworld as Pilot. Didn't know that either. But yeah, that is one of his earlier, bigger roles.
Interesting.
Where he's like a name. But again, he's not in the rest of the movie. From my memory, he's like a bully, and I think he's like in the very beginning and the very end, similar to the first one.
I wonder if he gets scared by Falkor.
I do not recall anything about it.
Anyway, back to our fan comments. Maria Meshkova at rogue_x109 said, the thing with the Cooper book, we talked about The Last of the Mohicans being one of the books that Bastian said he had read. She said the thing with that is that in the USSR and in all pro-Soviet, all of the pro-Soviet parts of Europe, I think, he was marketed as an author of children's books and was pretty popular among teen boys. And the listener who messaged April also mentioned that. They said that that type of adventure story used to be hugely popular in Germany. So
that doesn't surprise me. And again, I just to clarify, I don't know anything about the book, and I know very little about. I haven't even seen the movie. I've just seen parts of it. It was just because in my head, the movie is a more like Braveheart, gory, like more adult type of story in my head. It may not be. That's just my thought of it. So that was why I was kind of surprised by that.
Yeah.
But that totally makes sense because I know James Fenimore Cooper. A lot of his books are more like swashbuckly type of adventure books.
It is
that kids
interesting
would read.
because I think it's something that doesn't necessarily get held up next to the same kind of swashbuckly stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it is actually kind of similar, I think like here we generally don't put it in the same kind of category.
Yeah, I feel like we see it more as like almost not classic lit, but like close maybe in that
something you would read in a literature class.
Yeah.
Yeah. And on Instagram, we had 3 votes for the book and 3 for the movie. The Leap_77 said, I love this movie. One of the few treats I got to see in the theaters when I was a kid in the 80s. And it's not about nostalgia either. It has interesting characters, wild sets, and really touched on the fears and trials of childhood as coming-of-age stories became its own film genre. Plus, what kid from the 80s did not say, yeah, and dreamed of writing Falkor at the end?
I love how you say it's not about nostalgia and then go on to write like a very fueled review of the film. I do appreciate what you're saying, that I do think, and we touched on that there's definitely tons of elements of it that stand up regardless of nostalgia. Yeah. You could show this to a kid today and they would still, I think, very much enjoy it. It's very much not all based on nostalgia.
I think nostalgia is a perfectly legitimate reason to prefer something.
That also, yes.
I try to kind of step away from that nostalgia, like quote unquote trap, because I'm trying to give more of like take a more impartial look at this stuff, because that's what we do here. But I think nostalgia is a totally legit reason to like something or to prefer something.
Absolutely.
And our last comment was from the Neverending Story _page.
A Neverending Story fan page, it was.
Neverending Story fan page. And they said, I feel more attached to the movie because it's what I knew first. But I can't deny the book is technically better. I'm just glad I didn't read the book before seeing the movie. I wouldn't want to not like the movie. I know the whole thing by heart, and I could quote it start to finish without it even playing in the background.
Mm-hmm. That is something that is one way to do it, is you can watch the movie first, and then when you go back and read the book, you get that extra.
Yeah,
you get
totally.
More. You get extra. You don't have it ruined going now. Usually you don't have something ruined going from movie to book versus whereas some people, sometimes it can be.
Yeah, I think it generally is more likely going book to movie that you're going to have something ruined.
Yeah, that you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Whereas going movie to book, generally you get more, so it's not.
It's like it's like getting more special features on the DVD or something.
Exactly.
Extra content.
Yeah.
So our overall winner, and this was a little bit surprising to me.
Yeah.
It was close, but the book took it with 9 votes to the movie's 7.
Yeah.
I really thought the movie was going to take it.
I thought so too. I would have guessed the movie, but because I just wouldn't have thought that many people would have read the book, but like everybody who commented seemed to have read the book, and it's it's just one of those books that I've never read.
For some reason this one was not on my radar when I was a kid. So
it's interesting. All right, it's time to have a nice in-depth discussion about 80s kid movies, and are they really more traumatizing than movies from other decades?
No matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world.
So covering the Neverending Story made me think of an idea that I often see memed and discussed online.
Yes.
Mostly by like Gen Xers, millennials, some younger boomers.
Yeah.
I see say
yeah,
this.
Yeah.
But it's the idea that kids' movies, specifically from the 1980s, were extremely traumatizing, more so than kids' movies from other decades. And I want to start off by saying that we are by no means presenting this as like a definitive thesis on this topic. I did some light research, nothing heavy. I literally just want to chat about this because I find it interesting.
Yeah. And hopefully it'll spark some discussion.
Yeah. So namely, I am interested in exploring which movies are frequently cited as fitting into this idea of being traumatizing to watch as a child, and if there is actually a pattern of more 80s movies being cited as such. And then if there is a pattern, why we think that might be, and if there isn't, why that idea persists regardless.
Yeah.
Again, not a researched thesis.
We're not publishing this.
We're just chatting and hypothesizing.
Yeah.
So I thought it might be fun to start off by giving a few movies that we, your hosts, were traumatized by as children. And I think this is also a good place to bring up that both like within our specific discussion and also very much in general.
Very much within the culture.
Within this idea, traumatized is used pretty loosely.
Yes.
I think sometimes it means this movie utterly terrified me and I still can't watch it. And sometimes it means this movie horrified me, but I still wore out the VHS. And like sometimes it means scary, sometimes it means sad, sometimes it's like a mix.
And almost rarely is it ever used in the context of like actual trauma, that is somehow diagnosable or that
not
would need
in the
treatment
actual
of, you know
scientific sense of trauma.
So just to clarify that, this is more of the colloquial sense of traumatizing.
Some movies that scared me as a kid. Number one, first thing that always comes to mind, still refuse to watch this movie, is the 1977 animated version of The Hobbit.
I have never actually seen this. I've seen
I will not be watching it with you because I'm fully terrified of it still at 31 years old.
That's the Bakshi one, right? Is that Ralph Bakshi, I believe?
It's either Bakshi or Rankin and Bass.
Because I think it's
Rankin and Bass, actually.
I can't remember because Bakshi did Lord of the Rings, and I thought he did I don't remember. I've looked this up before, and then I always forget who did what, but yeah.
So I'm fully terrified of that movie. If you've never seen it, don't watch it. Just go look up screen caps. I mean, watch it if you want to watch it. But if you're just kind of passingly curious, just go look up some screen caps from it because literally every single character is utterly terrifying. It's like the artist sat down and were like, what is the most horrifying, frightening way that I can possibly bring this character to life? Let's do it.
It is a very specific art style. I'm pretty sure my dad really enjoyed that movie. He's a big Bakshi fan. He likes a lot of that art style from that period, like the Wizards, which is another Bakshi movie, is a movie he really enjoys. And I'm pretty sure it's Bakshi. If I got that wrong, don't come at me. I think that's correct though. But I think there's definitely, it is a very distinct style that is not exactly kid friendly. That's for sure. Like my dad saw it my dad probably saw it when he was in his early 20s or something. So.
Yeah, and I think we could probably put an asterisk on that one because was it really meant for kids?
Yeah.
Or do we just think of it kind of being for kids because it's animation? Because especially in the Western world, we tend to associate animation with being, it's for kids.
Yeah.
Right? But is it for kids? I don't know. Another one that I was traumatized by, and if you know what I'm talking about, we're close because I feel like people never know what this is when I bring it up. There was a 1991, probably straight to VHS, animated version of The Princess and the Goblin that I loved, but was also straight terrified of. That was one of those ones that, terrified of it, still wore out the VHS.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of sad that it's not commonly known because I would love to talk about it on this show because it is based on a book.
Yeah, the art of one of the characters in it, I assume maybe the goblin looks very familiar to me, or maybe it was aped in something else. I don't know. I'm trying to see who was like what studio, like what art studio was responsible.
I think it might have been like a European, like maybe some like an Eastern European kind of, and then it got an English dub, is what I suspect.
Directed by Josef that's a Hungarian name. The director's Hungarian, and I can't see what the studio is, but yeah, the director was Hungarian. Production companies: Paranoia Film Studio. Oh no, not Paranoia. Pannonia Film Studio in Hungary.
So there you go.
Looks like the primary.
Probably why a
film
lot
studio.
of people don't know it.
Yeah. And anyways.
It's also something that I'm always on, like, whenever I go to a thrift store, I look at the VHSs because I'm always like, I'm going to find a copy of this movie and I'm going to bust out our old VCR that my mom gave to us so that we could watch Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
And I'm going to watch this movie and see if it holds up. It probably won't. That's fine. And then my other scary movie is more of an honorable mention because most of it I was not scared of, but the 1940 original Fantasia was utterly terrified of the night at Bald Mountain sequence at the end.
I don't know if I remember which part that is. What happens?
I think you would remember it if you saw it.
I mean, I know I've seen Fantasia all the way through.
It's the one where the giant, like, winged devil character comes out of the peak of the mountain.
Yes. Yes, I do recall that. Yes,
I would watch Fantasia all the way through, and then scream for my grandma to come turn it off. So those were my scary movies. I also had a couple sad movies. The Land Before Time.
Yes,
I also loved, but
it's great. But
it's a great movie. It's very sad. At the time, I would watch that like every day. I was also a child being raised by a single mother and her maternal grandparents, so that really hit home for me. The Fox and the Hound. Mm-hmm. Super sad. Still can't watch The Fox and the Hound.
Yep.
And Dumbo will have me in tears to this day.
Yeah. I didn't include any sad movies because The Land Before Time and The Fox and the Hound were like the two that I thought of, so I just... It's like I'll just put a yes also on those because I'm not interested in. I would watch The Land Before Time again just because I am not interested in ever watching The Fox and the Hound again.
Yeah,
I don't even remember what happens. I just remember as a child being like, I don't like this.
It's not a fun movie.
It's just sad. I don't like it.
It's not a fun movie.
Yeah, I remember just being like, nah, I'm good.
It is based on a book though.
Oh, is it? And yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure a lot of those were. So mine are I guess scary. So the first two are scary, kind of. Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and it's really only one scene. It's the Large Marge scene.
Yeah,
scared the shit out of me as a kid. I remember the first time I saw it, I was not prepared for the. I mean, who could be prepared for the Large Marge scene? And then the other one that is. I actually loved this movie and watched it a lot, and it's a very it's a movie that has had a slight resurgence. I think some podcasts have talked about it on like bad movie podcasts, which I loved it as a kid. Is the Peanut Butter Solution, which is
never heard of this.
It is a Canadian film that somehow my dad was aware of, recorded off. I don't know how we had a copy of it. We had it on VHS, and it's about a kid who gets a fright. He goes into like a house or something and gets scared by something that happened. I don't remember the details. I haven't seen it since I was a kid, and all of his hair falls out.
Oh.
And then, and I say it might be a female. I don't remember. It might be a girl character. I don't recall. I think it's a boy. I don't remember. And all his hair falls out, and then the Peanut Butter Solution is he meets some witch or something who gives him this or a book that gives him a formula for a hair regrowing solution, the peanut butter solution that is made of peanut butter and like flies and other stuff.
Well, this sounds very doll-esque.
It could be. I don't know.
I don't think it is. But...
And then he uses this, but then his hair grows back, but then it won't stop growing.
Oh God!
And he ends up the weirdest twist ever. he lives in a town, I think it's in the same town, that a paintbrush factory magnate runs a paintbrush factory in, and he's like this evil paintbrush magnate who kidnaps him and holds him hostage and harvests his hair to make paintbrushes, because they're the best possible type of paintbrush is made of human hair, and he has this never-ending supply of human hair because this kid's hair won't stop growing.
Everything you've told me about this has gotten progressively more terrifying.
And then
it's all build.
And then I think the climax of the film is his like sister and his friend or something coming to rescue him from this factory where he's being held hostage and having his hair harvested. I really remember enjoying it as a kid and thinking it is a weird kind of freaky movie.
Yeah.
There's like some visual gags with like hair growing, and it's just a weird. It's a wild film. But I remember quite liking it. And then finally, my last one, and this one isn't so much scary to me as it was traumatizing, is Gremlins. I've still never seen Gremlins. I made my parents put it on one time we were watching it, and I was fine with it all the way up until they turned into gremlins. And it wasn't that I was scared of the gremlins. It's when the humans started murdering the gremlins. I was like, I'm done with this. I ain't here. Specifically, they like microwave one and it explodes. And I was so upset by like them just murdering these little creatures. I was like not here for it. In the same way that like I when I was a kid, I couldn't like the idea of like catching and killing fish or something, like hunting any of that. I was not into any of that. I'm still not really, but like if I had to like catch and clean a fish now, I could. But as a kid, I just couldn't do it. I just hated the idea of it completely. And this movie, like murdering even though they were like evil, you know, or whatever,
right.
Like I was not into it. I wasn't having it. I was like, nope, not watching this. Still never seen it. So
Such a gentle soul.
yeah, that's my other one.
All right, so those are a few of our personal ones, but I wanted something broader, something more general that
yes.
we could work off of that pulled from a bigger pool. So what I did, do the scientific thing and explain my methodology here. It's probably very flawed. Don't come for me, scientists. I Googled most traumatizing kids movies. And I looked at the entire first page of results. It was a bunch of listicles.
Right, yes.
I then did the same thing with saddest kids movies and then scariest kids movies. Basically, I went through each list and I wrote down each movie title. And if a movie was mentioned more than once, I made a tally mark next to the title. Now, I want to note, too, that I did not include movies that weren't marketed as, like, family movies. And I say that because a lot of the lists included like adult horror movies like Poltergeist and The Exorcist.
Which there are tons of people who
were
traumatized by those movies.
Traumatized by that as kids, but they weren't intended for kids. And I feel like that's a whole different conversation.
That is a very different conversation.
So I just didn't include those.
Yeah.
But I then combined all of those results to aggregate an overall master list with the movies that appeared most frequently towards the top. So it totaled out to 147 individual movie titles, 72 of which were mentioned at least twice across, I looked at 23 different lists. This is what I did today. And I then narrowed that down into a top 10 list featuring the movies with the most overall mentions. So I'm going to start at number...
This is real journalism, I'll have you know, by the way. You're doing real journalism here. If we don't get a Pulitzer for this... they give podcast Pulitzers, right?
Well, maybe they should. So at number 10, with 5 mentions apiece, we had 2007's Bridge to Terabithia and 1982's The Last Unicorn.
I'm aware of Bridge to Terabithia, and I've never heard of The Last Unicorn.
The Last Unicorn, I have tried to watch a couple times. I just have a hard time watching it. It's got a very distinct art style.
Is it an animated film?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not the same art style as The Hobbit that I mentioned, but it is kind of similar-ish.
Gotcha.
Very distinct looking. At number 9 on my list, with 6 mentions apiece, 2010's Toy Story 3, and 1940's Pinocchio. And I feel like I want to put an asterisk next to Toy Story 3. Because, like, yes, it's marketed to kids, but I think we can all agree that the point was to traumatize adults.
Yes, absolutely.
So...
real quick, The Last Unicorn is Rankin Bass. So
okay, yeah.
if The Hobbit was, which
and
I
believe it was,
then
yeah.
that would make sense. Sorry.
At number 8, with 7 mentions apiece, there are several movies tied here with 7 mentions each. 1971's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah.
2009's Up. 1990's The Witches. 1988's The Land Before Time. 1982's The Dark Crystal. 1957's Old Yeller. And 1968's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
It's been a long time since I've seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but I don't recall.
I don't think I've ever seen Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, but it's the kid catcher that people cite as being, like, traumatizing.
Oh, okay. I don't remember enough about it. I don't remember that being a movie that to me stuck out as creepy, but because I know I've seen it. I saw it several times as a kid, but I don't remember what the kid. I don't remember, so I can't comment on it. But
at number 7, with 8 total mentions, was 1991's My Girl.
That's Macaulay Culkin, right?
Yeah. At number 6, we have another one with several here, all tied with 9 mentions each. 1988's Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
I almost put that on my list, by the way. It's only one scene. I loved that movie as a kid, but there is one particular scene
yeah, I know. I know the
not
one.
Great.
I know the one.
Yeah.
1994's The Lion King. 1981's The Fox and the Hound. 1985's Return to Oz. 2009's Coraline. And 1989's All Dogs Go to Heaven. Side note, guess who was on my list a lot? It won Mr. Don Bluth.
Yeah, Don Bluth definitely will be on that list quite a bit.
Quite a bit. At number 5, with 10 mentions, 1941's Dumbo. At number 4, with 11 mentions, 1942's Bambi. Another side note, whatever the heck was going on at Disney Animation in the 40s, the 1940s category is literally all Disney. It's just all creepy old Disney movies.
Yeah, I mean, that's World War II.
I mean, yeah, but like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's interesting. Number 3, with 12 overall mentions, 1982's E.T. And number 2?
Yeah, E.T. is one of those ones that I can see. I was never a big fan of E.T. as a kid because I just didn't think it was fun enough to make up for, like, I don't know. I haven't seen E.T. since I was that's another one I haven't seen since I was a little kid, and I remember not being a big fan of it. Just being like, it's fine, but it's kind of sad, and I don't know. Yeah.
So at number 2, with 13 overall mentions, is 1978's Watership Down.
Never seen it, but I'm aware of what
I'm aware.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll ever do that one on here because I don't think I can stomach it.
Yeah.
And at number 1, and I swear I did not fudge this,
Didn't fudge the numbers.
with 16 mentions across 23 lists, 1984's The Neverending Story.
Neverending Story. There you go. Yeah, that's that's funny. I would not have expected it to be number 1. Well, I guess I can see it because, and we'll get into some details of why movies are talked. We'll get into some more, but I can see it because of how popular it was, mixed with the Artax scene. Like, so that, like,
Yeah.
that specific scene mixed with it being a much more, like, widely consumed movie, I would imagine, than some of these other ones. And for other reasons that we'll get into shortly. It doesn't necessarily surprise me that it's number 1.
It was a real, like, neck and neck heat between that and Watership Down the whole time I was going through these lists. I was like, well, what's it gonna be?
Yeah.
What's it gonna be? I don't know, and it was really interesting going through those lists. I mean, it was kind of tedious,
Right.
but It was interesting.
Yeah.
So to break down that top 10 list by decade, in the 2010s, we had one appearance from the 2010s. 2000s, we had 3 movies from the 1990s, 9 movies from the 1980s, 2 from the 70s, 1 from the 60s, 1 from the 50s, and 3 from the 40s.
Mm-hmm. So basically, the 80s equaled almost everything else combined. Almost.
Pretty much.
Not quite, but...
Not quite, but close. But here's where it gets interesting. I also sorted my overall master list by decade. Again, this is what I did today.
And this is the one that had
147
movies
different
on it.
titles. And in terms of sheer number of movie titles mentioned, the 1990s beat out the 80s
There you go.
with 43 movie titles to the 80s 37.
And not just that's a pretty significant margin for,
Yeah.
I mean, that's what, like almost a 20%? Yeah, almost 20% more, roughly.
And the 2000s were actually not far behind with 32 individual titles.
Yeah.
So they were catching up the 80s. So now that we have some raw data to work with, let's go back to our original questions. Were there that many more traumatizing kids movies to come out of the 80s than any other decade? I think the answer is yes and no.
In good scientific fashion, the answer is it's complicated.
Yeah. So our top 10 list, the 80s blew every other decade out of the water.
Yes.
Easily. However, in the overall list, the 90s actually came out on top, followed by the 80s, with the 2000s not far behind.
Mm-hmm.
So we have kind of like a 30-year span of trauma.
Yes, those specific 30 years.
Yeah. Since we've established that there is at least some kind of pattern here, let's talk about why we think that is. So one thing that I think we could factor in to this conversation is changes to the film rating system.
Yeah, this is something I thought of initially that I'm sure other people have talked about. But yeah, that was one of my first thoughts.
Yeah. So the PG-13 rating was added in 1984. It didn't exist before 1984. Now, I didn't go and look at the ratings of these movies. This is just me spitballing here.
Yeah.
If you want to go look at all the ratings and draw your own data, be my guest. But I think it's possible that before that PG-13 rating, maybe kids' movies got away with more heavy content.
That's generally the agreed upon consensus that I've heard. I don't. Again, that who knows how actually accurate that is. I don't know if somebody has done gone through and seen how many PG movies used certain language and had certain scenes. You know what I mean?
That would be a mess.
That would be a whole mess. But I don't know. I don't think that's been done. So it is more of a general consensus of what has been gotten away with. But that is what you see online is people generally think that movies before 1984 that had that PG rating were able to get away with more because it was either that or R. So it was and if it didn't have a whole bunch of vulgarity and a whole bunch of violence, it tended to be slapped down in a PG rating. So
I think it's also potentially possible that maybe there was a period of time following that in which the rating system maybe wasn't operating smoothly.
I'm sure it has been hammered out in the intervening years to what, you know, because now there's the rule of you get in a PG-13 movie, you get one usage of the F word. And in a certain way, it can't be related to sex. It has to be specifically related to just as an expletive.
Yeah.
But anyways, but I don't know if that was the rule since 1984. My guess would be probably not, but who knows? We didn't go into that much detail with this. Or you didn't. I didn't do any of this research, but you didn't go into that much detail.
No, did not go into that much detail. Another filmmaking-centric theory that I had was that potentially, following the advent of the Disney Renaissance in the late 80s and early 90s, maybe there was a general tone shift in kids' movies into a different type of storytelling, more big musical numbers, romance at the forefront, happy ending pretty much guaranteed, like typical Disney formula.
And once you hit on that and it's successful, once Disney hits on that and it's successful in 89 with Beauty and the Beast, right? Little Mermaid. Yeah. It makes sense that other studios would be like, okay, this is the thing.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
the thing is more like fun, poppy, not poppy, but like, you know, colorful, not more imaginative, but just less creepy, less grim, less just more optimistic,
right,
sort of films.
And I will say too that I didn't sort the 147 films on my master list by like studio or anything like that, but I think the only Disney Renaissance movies to appear on it at all were The Lion King.
Yeah.
And I think The Hunchback of Notre Dame got maybe like 2 or 3 mentions.
Yeah, I could see there's this the Frollo scenes.
Yeah. I mean, The Hunchback is pretty. Hunchback is kind of an outlier for Disney Renaissance. That's pretty dark.
It is. Yeah.
And Aladdin was mentioned once, but I would consider that kind of an outlier.
That's an outlier
for my list. That was like a specific person who was scared of something specific.
Yeah,
in Aladdin,
a very specific thing of like.
It's not one that you hear come up frequently.
I could see like maybe the cave at the beginning or something.
I think that's what it was actually.
Being creepy or whatever. Like yeah.
So I think we could also look at this from a more broad historical perspective. And this was something that you brought up when we initially talked about this a couple weeks ago. So films in the 80s and 90s were being made in a post-Vietnam world, following a lot of social upheaval and a lot of loss of faith in institutions. And a lot of the people who were making movies and working on movies in the 80s and 90s would have experienced those things firsthand. Yeah. And your trauma makes its way into your art, regardless of what that art is. Mm-hmm. And for the 2000s, we could also factor in that not only is it now a post-Vietnam world, it's also a post-9/11 world.
Yeah.
Trauma on top of trauma.
Yeah.
That's all we know. Mm-hmm. Now, all of those are good theories, and I think they could explain all or part of this phenomenon.
Just to be clear, just real quick, you said trauma on top of trauma, it's all we know in reference to 9/11 and Vietnam. It is a very privileged position as Americans we're coming from that those are the most traumatic parts of our... I just wanted to clarify for the sake of global listeners that, like, it is very much the case that, that there is... We're speaking from a very American-centric view here. It is a whole other thing to go to other places. But anyways, I just wanted, sorry.
So they're all good theories. Mm-hmm. I think they can all explain at least part of this phenomenon. Mm-hmm. This is our main theory.
Yes.
And I don't think it's a unique theory.
No.
But it's
your theory. I looked at it and was like, I had the same thought. So you're just to clarify, you wrote all this, but I was like, that was the same thing I was thinking.
So this whole thing started because on the internet, I often see this memed, discussed idea about 80s movies being more traumatizing. And I often see that coupled alongside the idea that kids in the 80s were allowed to run free and they weren't coddled.
Yes.
And I think the grain of truth to that, it's a teeny tiny little grain, but I think the grain of truth to that is that in the 90s, the 24-hour news cycle started to be much more prevalent. Mm-hmm. So we were at least hearing about a lot more instances of like kids being kidnapped and murdered and like all these horrible things happening. Probably more than we had been before when the news was more or less local plus big.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I don't know the numbers, but I think it is real sticky situations because the statistics for this do exist. But from my understanding, I think it is fairly true that the numbers of those instances of kidnapping and what, all of the stuff that blew up in the 90s and became this big fear, blah, blah, blah. And those numbers didn't particularly change from what they were previously. It was just people were aware of it now
Yeah.
because of the way media and news media was consumed.
And I think it probably is true that some parents bought into the mood of that era in regard to parenting their kids. But I don't think that's the case for everyone. I think that's just how we remember it.
It definitely is not the case for everyone. I mean, I was born in the 80s, but I'm 88. I was a kid of the 90s, and I was allowed to go almost wherever I wanted.
Yeah.
And my parents were fairly protective too. Like, my parents weren't like just it's not that I was allowed to go wherever I wanted, but like I was, I would go out and during the summer I'd leave in the morning and go, me and my friends would ride our bikes all around our neighborhood and stuff. There was like certain roads I couldn't cross, like I couldn't go across like within certain boundaries,
roads.
like busier roads and stuff, like, until I was like in high school or whatever, or, a teenager. But we would go all over our neighborhood, like we wouldn't ride 6 miles down to, across the other side of town or anything. But and again, that's obviously a very specific anecdote of my childhood growing up. But I think it is the case that it varied a lot based on.
I mean, it was a little bit different for me in like my early childhood because I lived with my grandparents, and that was a very like suburban upbringing, and my grandma was like pretty protective of me. But after I was like 6 or 7, we moved out to the literal middle of nowhere. And I lived on like a dead end road surrounded by forest. Yeah. And I would leave the house and not return until the evening. And there were a lot of reasons for that. But I went all over the place. I would walk like miles away on the side of the road. And I think about that sometimes and I'm like, it is astonishing that I did not get like snatched up by some random asshole in a truck.
Yeah. I mean, you say that, but it's actually not astonishing because that's actually very rare. It's just one of those things that seems like it happens more often than it does. But
I mean, what I mean is like now with the perspective of an adult, I look back and I'm like, oh, that wasn't safe.
Yeah, that is. I will say that it is generally like. It is probably a better idea not to let your kids completely run all over town. Like, it depends on there's a within reason type of thing. Like there's, obviously independence and setting firm boundaries and stuff for your kids seems very important. But it also like sort of the freewheeling, your kids leave at 8 a.m. and you don't know where they are until they come home at 6 p.m. probably is not the best way to parent.
That's like the other end of the extreme.
Yeah, it's probably not the best way to parent would be my guess, but I'm not a parent, so who knows.
So all this to say, I think to explain why this idea about 80s movies is such a thing, we have to look at who we is.
That's it.
And when you're discussing pop culture on the internet, we very much tends to be Gen Xers and millennials.
Yep.
Along with a handful of like younger boomers and older Gen Zers.
Especially up until the last few years, that was especially the case. Within the last, 3 or 4 years, Gen Z has gotten to an age where they're joining the conversation a lot more, especially with the rise of things like TikTok and stuff. But like before that, it was almost entirely Gen X and millennials who were having...
and I think we are going to see more of a trend of movies from the 2000s and the 2010s being talked about as like, oh, this traumatized my childhood in the same way that we've talked about 80s movies and 90s movies.
Absolutely the case, because we already see, I haven't seen the discussion itself on TikTok, but I have seen people on Twitter or whatever discussing the wave of Gen Zers posting memes about how they wished they had grown up in like the early 2000s when music was good or whatever, and it's it's like Linkin Park, and so like that is already happening. That romanticizing and sort of mythologizing of the 2000s or whatever is already happening. It's just happening in places that us old folks aren't seeing it.
I beg of you, Gen Z. I beg of you, do not bring back early 2000s eyebrows. I beg of you. Anything else, please. Anyway, so I think the reason that we have this idea that 80s movies are more traumatizing than movies from any other decade as a common refrain, and the idea that the reason that 80s, 90s, and 2000s movies are dominating these lists of traumatizing films is simply because of who is directing and participating in the conversation.
Yep.
It's people who were kids and teenagers during the 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
This is always the case. This is critical theory, like, to a T. Like, the things that dominate the popular discussion are always based on the people that are discussing them. It's the same reason that why is it that every, book that you read in high school was written by some white guy? Like every literary, like not every, but like it, especially in the 80s and 90s or whatever, almost every book in your lit class in high school was probably written by like an English white guy, like an English speaking white guy, right? Like most of them. And it's like, because who is leading that discussion? Who is participating in that discussion?
Who had the means and the time and the education to write during those previous time periods?
Yes. That and...
It's old white guys.
Yes, that and who's deciding, who's participating in the discussion.
Coming up with the reading list?
Yes, who's coming up with the reading list.
It's old white guys.
Yeah, who's coming up with the reading list, who's having those discussions in the time period about what is valuable literature or media or whatever. It's the same people. And so that's why things get dominated by those specific things. Yeah.
And to get back to movies, I think you could also factor in the advent of new technology. Like, what did we have for the first time in the 80s and 90s? We had home video.
Yeah.
We had VCR. We had VHS. Whereas, in the 60s or 70s, you might have seen a movie once in the theaters or caught The Wizard of Oz on TV once a year at Christmas. But from like the 80s onward, you can be exposed to far more media far more frequently. And that at least partly explains why millennials and Gen Zers who didn't directly experience the 80s will sometimes still cite some 80s movies as being traumatizing. It's because they've actually seen them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a very important point because, it's one thing to have seen a movie once and be like scared by it or something. It's another thing to wear a VHS out watching it, and every time, because kids are stupid. We're stupid when we're kids. And so we emotionally experience the same thing every single time we watch the movie. You know what I mean? So like searing the scene where Artax dies into your brain by watching the movie 20 times is going to have a far different effect than the one time you saw Old Yeller die, saw the end of Old Yeller. Sure, it affected you, but you didn't watch it 30 times in 40 days or whatever. Like, so it's a very different thing.
And two, like, kind of to go off of that same idea, there's a quote, and I can't remember the exact quote. I think it's from You've Got Mail, about how, like, the books that you read as a kid stay with you the way that other books just don't.
Yeah.
And I think you can say the same thing about movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
The movies that we view, especially over and over when we're kids, just stick with us.
Yeah, because you can watch things over and over again as a kid. Like it's hard. You're hard pressed. I'm hard pressed to want to watch a movie again within a year.
Yeah.
It's very rare. Like, it has to be an exceptional film that was, like something like Mad Max Fury Road. I was like we got to go see that again next week. I don't, something like that. There's those kind of movies that you want to see several times, but it's very rare other than that. But as a kid, garbage. Any garbage, I'll watch it constantly.
And I mentioned earlier that I would watch The Land Before Time like every day. That is not an exaggeration.
No, yeah.
You can ask my mom.
Yeah, people
ask any of my relatives.
No, I'm sure
every day.
And parents these days, current parents are very aware of that phenomenon with things like Frozen and stuff. Like it's just kids will watch the same thing over and over again. And before 1980, you didn't have that ability.
Yeah.
Before whenever VHS is, I'm sure.
I mean, VHS.
Whenever VHS became prolific and people were able to record things, and home VHS and home video became a prolific thing, which was probably more like the late 80s or whatever. But still, yeah.
And then speaking too of new technology, with the internet, I think we do get a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy here, especially with as common as this idea about 80s movies tends to be online. even before you see a movie, you're told it's sad, it's scary, it's traumatizing, etc., etc. So when you do finally see it, that's what you're looking for. The call is coming from inside the house, you guys.
Absolutely. All right, that was fun. Let us know what you think on the prequel episode. If you have thoughts, go find the prequel episode, Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and let us know if you agree, if you disagree, if you think there's a different reason. Was it actually that just movies were creepier back in the 80s or more traumatizing? Or is it based on this? What's your theory? Why do you think everybody is talking about 80s movies being so creepy? Let us know.
And also let us know what movies you were traumatized by.
What movies traumatized you? I'm sure we hit a lot of them in that list, but if there are some other ones, let us know.
And I have this giant spreadsheet. I might link this somewhere so that, because here's the thing, we just did the top 10 list. If yours was not on that top 10 list, I can almost guarantee you it is somewhere on here.
Yeah, it's 147 movies.
We started with like 5 mentions of 5, but there were a lot of mentions of 4 and 3.
Yeah. All right, there are no book facts this week because obviously it's the same book, but we do have movie facts for The Neverending Story Part 2, the next chapter.
Now is the time to revisit the land of the never-ending story for an all-new adventure where a young boy returns to a wondrous world on the wings of his own imagination, the world of Falcor.
Boy, am I glad to see you.
The Rockbiter.
Meet Junior.
It's Yum Yum, Rocky.
The brave Atreyu.
I'm glad you came back to Fantasia.
And the childlike Empress.
You have found the only wish powerful enough to save us, Bastion.
The Neverending Story 2, the next chapter, is a 1990 film directed by George Miller. No, not that George Miller. George T. Miller, a Scottish-Australian director known mostly for TV. It was written by Karen Howard, who also wrote The Tigress and Midnight Flight, 2 things I'd never heard of. She didn't have a very prolific career. She had like 8 credits or something. I mean, I say not prolific. She didn't write, 50 movies or anything like that. And the film stars Jonathan Brandis as Bastion, Kenny Morrison as Atreyu, Alexandra Johns as the childlike Empress, John Wesley Shipp, who is the Flash in the 1980 TV show, and also comes back as the Flash. He's the Flash's dad in the CW show. That actor.
Oh, okay. All right.
That actor, right? Isn't he his dad in that?
I have
CW?
no idea.
I can't remember.
I'm trusting you here.
We watched the first 3 seasons.
Yeah, but
I
don't know that actor off the top of my head.
Well, whoever the old Flash guy.
The old Flash. Okay.
Isn't he he's not his dad. I don't remember.
I thought he was just like older Flash.
I thought he was maybe his dad or something.
His dad's dead.
Yeah. And that was his I don't remember. Whatever. In the CW Flash, the old guy with the metal Flash helmet, he was also the Flash in the 80s TV show.
Gotcha.
That actor. He plays Bastion's dad in this movie, Mr. Bucks. And Clarissa Burt as Zaidi. New character.
But we recast everyone else.
The only returning actor was Thomas Hill as Carl Conrad Coriander.
There we go.
We'll get into why they were recast very shortly. The film has a 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 30% on Metacritic, and a 5.2 out of 10 on IMDb. It was a financial flop with a box office of roughly $17 million against an estimated budget of $36 million.
Woof.
So not great. So this movie the series was always planned as a trilogy, according to producer Dieter Geisler. But production on this sequel had to be postponed due to Enda's lawsuit that we mentioned in the previous prequel. He sued them, said he went ahead and he sued them saying that they needed to change the movie or that the title of the movie or that they had to take his name off it. And he also wanted he wanted a say in any of the future films they would make. Ultimately, we know Enda would lose that lawsuit. And as a result of that, they would go on to make this film. So, since it took so long, because of this lawsuit, the movie got delayed. The original came out in 1984. This movie didn't go into production until like 89 or 88 or something, like late 80s, because it came out in 1990.
Yeah.
and the original actors were all too old.
Right.
So they couldn't cast the original, they couldn't just use the same actors again. So they auditioned over 600 children to recast the 3 main characters before landing on the 3 that they went with.
It's a lot of children.
It's a lot. The Neverending Story, the first one, apparently relied heavily. We talked about this, and I thought it was interesting because I assumed they were matte paintings in the original Neverending Story. Apparently, they weren't. The original Neverending Story relied heavily on scale models and blue screen to create a lot of the effects, but the next chapter would actually use more life-size models and matte paintings, which to me, I looked like there was some matte paintings in.
Yeah, it looked like it at a couple points, but
yeah, but who knows? Maybe not. I don't know. Whatever. And then my final note, I couldn't find a lot about this movie. My final note that I thought was interesting is that due to labor rules regarding child actors, specifically in I guess Munich where they filmed this, but I don't know if it is the same and was the same in America or whatever. But due to labor laws regarding child actors, George Miller decided to only rehearse scenes once before filming. And he maximized the time shooting with the children on set by running up to 3 cameras during a given scene. Which running 2 cameras is not super uncommon, but 3 is a little more rare. And even 2's not super. Like, they run 2 cameras a lot on, like, sitcoms and stuff. Like The Office, pretty much. If you ever watch, like, bloopers from The Office, you can tell they're always running, like, at least 2 cameras. But usually, a lot of times in film, you're running 1 camera because your shot is only lit for that whatever angle you're shooting it. Like, you can't. It's rarer to be able to run multiple cameras. You have to light it very differently, and it tends to look less cinematic than. Like, if you're lighting to be able to shoot multiple cameras. Generally, you're probably not lighting it in the most cinematic way possible. You're lighting it in a way that allows you to have multiple cameras at different angles running. So,
like more reminiscent of a sitcom.
More reminiscent, not even a sitcom, but just of like a TV show or something. Because like Star Trek, a lot, and like TNG and stuff, a lot of times would run, I think, like 2 cameras, and just because it's more efficient. Obviously, if you can shoot. Like the reaction, like if you can shoot if 2 people are having a conversation and you can shoot both of those at the same time, like the both people, like the close up on both people talking, that's obviously way more efficient than setting up one, shooting one half of the conversation, going over and setting up the other one instead of shooting the other half of the conversation, which is traditionally on film how it's done because you have to light it for each person and that sort of thing. Not always, obviously, it changes wildly depending on blocking and all manner of things.
I feel exhausted.
It varies wildly depending on, like I said, blocking and all manner of things, and particularly like as camera technology gets better and better, you can get away with more and more, and editing software gets better and better. You can get away with lighting things less and differently and blah blah blah. It's all very complicated, but.
I feel very tired just listening to you describe that process.
Yeah, but it's lots of setting up things, to tearing things down, moving things around. Yeah, it's very, very. But anyway, so he filmed with 3 cameras to kind of speed up the process because just to make sure they weren't missing stuff. But because of this, they got through stuff really fast, and they ended up getting done like way ahead of schedule, and the special effects shots that they needed for later scenes weren't done, like the models and the mat, all that sort of stuff wasn't done yet, so they were just like sitting around with nothing to do until that stuff got finished. So it ended up not exactly going perfectly to plan, which apparently is evident in the film. That being said, I fucking loved this movie as a kid. I don't know if it's any good, but I watched it a lot.
Absolutely certain I've never seen this. I wasn't 100% sure with the Neverending Story, the original one. Absolutely certain I have not seen this movie.
I definitely have.
None of it looks familiar.
So many times. I'm here for it. I can't wait to watch it again because I haven't seen it. It's not one of those ones like I saw Star Wars a million times when I was a kid, but I also watched it every couple year or two as a young adult, but that's not the case with this one. I probably last saw this when I was like 12 or something, and I haven't seen it since then. So I'm very excited to revisit it. Where you can watch it, as always, check your local library, or if you still have a local video rental store, check with them. If you have a streaming subscription to HBO Max, HBO, Amazon Prime,
that's what it said.
HBO, Amazon Prime, or DirecTV. I'm assuming it just means if you have HBO
like through
Amazon Prime or DirecTV.
Probably
would be my guess. Or maybe it's just on DirecTV. I don't know. But HBO, Amazon Prime, you can like add HBO to Amazon Prime, so I'm assuming that's what it means. And then finally, you can do what we're going to be doing, which is you can rent it for $3 to $4 on Fandango, Redbox, Apple TV, Amazon, YouTube, Vudu, DirecTV, etc. That's what we'll be doing. We'll be renting it on ye old Amazon, most likely.
We don't have any HBO subscriptions.
Not currently.
Because we're not wealthy.
Well, there's stuff I want to watch,
There is
stuff I want to watch. But currently we don't have it.
I'm just poking fun because HBO Max still sells itself as like the bougie thing.
How much is HBO Max?
I have no idea.
I have no idea how much
I'm
it
just
costs.
poking fun at it.
I was about to say, we pay for like 4 different streaming services, so I don't know if that... yeah. But, once Game of Thrones ended, we turned it off and haven't gone back yet. Not yet.
Do you hear that, HBO?
You lost us when you ruined Game of Thrones. Anyways, that's what we got for this prequel episode. As always, you can do us a giant favor. Head over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us for however much you want. You'll get a shout out at the beginning of every prequel episode and other stuff like bonus content and whatnot. Oh, we need to do one soon.
Yeah, we need to do one soon.
For a March, we'll be doing, do you know what it is?
We will be doing Tyler Perry's Acrimony.
Oh, God. Okay, so somebody's a good, bad, or bad fan and recommended.
I was actually Shelby.
Oh,
and
yeah, and Shelby is a good, bad, or bad fan, so that's why we're watching Acrimony. Great. Would be my guess. I don't know. Maybe Tyler Perry's Acrimony is great, but based on my knowledge of Tyler Perry's other film... what was the one we did? I don't even remember what the name of the film we did for.
Was it Temptation?
Temptation.
Or something like that?
Something like that. It's a nightmare, and it's going to be very problematic. Can't wait.
At least that we can talk about some of the problematic stuff.
I'm going to get really into it. It's going to be fun. So that'll be our March bonus episode. It's going to be a roast of most likely of Tyler Perry's Acrimony. And also you can follow us on social media. Like I said, comment and give us your feedback on the 80s movie discussion, the traumatizing film discussion, and all that good stuff. We'll be back in 1 week's time with April at Mansky from No Such Thing as a Bad Movie Pod to discuss the Neverending Story Part 2, the next chapter. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary, everybody else,
keep reading books,
keep watching movies,
and keep being awesome.